All right, hello, Wolfpack. Today's guest is Rickelle Tallent, owner of Tallent Nutrition. So, Rickelle is a registered dietitian and performance nutrition coach, and she's passionate about guiding athletes toward peak performance through personalized nutrition. She believes that nutrition is the backbone of peak performance, and it's essential for building the strength, endurance, and resilience necessary to reach and sustain full athletic potential. She is a former competitive athlete in dance and gymnastics and mom of two young hockey players. She earned her bachelor's degree in nutrition sciences and her master's degree in kinesiology, both from the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. And she is certified as a registered dietitian by the Commission on Dietetic Registration. She's based in Las Vegas and licensed in the state of Nevada, as well as several other states. She has been working with clients for 10 years, and 6 of those have been through her business, Tallent Nutrition, and I'm very excited to have her on the show today. So, welcome, Rickelle.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. So, I was recently checking out your website just to learn a little bit more about like what you do, and we've had a bunch of conversations already, on health, fitness, nutrition, obviously. But one of those things that stood out to me that we never talked about was your experience with sports growing up. So particularly the fact that you're a competitive dancer and gymnast. So kind of want to learn a little bit more about that. What was your experience like as a dancer and a gymnast, and kind of how did that shape you into eventually getting, because I'm going to assume that that had some sort of influence on your career choice as a nutrition coach, right? So maybe we could talk about your experience as an athlete a little bit more growing up, and then kind of like how you got into this whole nutrition coaching and being a registered dietitian and that sort of stuff.
Okay. So actually, surprisingly, at that time, I didn't know anything about nutrition. We weren't really taught, I don't know, it was never brought up at all, unfortunately, in dance or gymnastics, or even in high school when I also did competitive cheer. The only thing about nutrition that I knew or thought of during those years was, how can I eat less to be skinny?
Okay.
And those sports, even to this day, there is still a big emphasis on, what your body looks like. And
Yeah.
it's gotten a little better, but, it used to be you wanted to stay very thin. Even I hated my legs growing up. And looking back, they were not big, but they had muscle. I wanted them I thought they needed to look like my arms and be, your thighs couldn't touch and stuff like that. So it was very disordered my mindset around what my body looked like and even what I ate was very disordered.
Okay.
And, we never had anyone coming in talking about nutrition for performance or health or anything like that. So I didn't get into nutrition for sports really until, in college during my degree. We did have sports nutrition, and I considered that at the time my fun nutrition. So when I thought about what I was going to do once I did my internship and stuff, it was more, okay, like the diabetes and the heart health, that'd be my real job. And then the sports will be my fun job.
Okay.
And then I got into my first year as a dietitian, and I started realizing sometimes that these people I was seeing who were 40s, 50s, 60s, and very unhealthy, some of them were former athletes. Like some were high school, some were college, some were even pro athletes. And at first I was trying to think in my mind, how did we go from that to you can't even walk a minute or two to your mailbox without being in pain or winded or...
It's interesting to think about, isn't it? How do we get to that point, right?
Yeah, and I'm like, how did this happen? But then I looked back and I'm like, as a female athlete, it was all we thought about was what our bodies looked like. We never thought about eating for long-term health or performance or anything like that. And then with the boys, my friends who were athletes, it was more the mindset of just eat whatever you want because you can, right? Like,
Because you can, right?
yeah, because
Yeah.
you can, or oh,
Yeah.
you need the
Mm-hmm.
calories. Like,
Yeah. It's
just eat whatever
different
you
mindset
want.
there.
But it
Mm-hmm.
was never, they weren't taught healthy habits. It was never, oh, make sure you're eating carbs with fiber at your majority of your meals, or make sure you're eating enough lean protein. I mean, there was nothing like that. It was just eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
Well, then you retire, right? Whether it's at 18 or 25 or 30 or 40, and you just keep eating like that. So the girls just keep dieting and the boys
Mm-hmm.
just keep eating whatever they want because you
Mm-hmm.
never learned any better. And then
Yeah.
you end up 10 years later with all these health issues.
Yeah.
And then add decades more onto that. And so then I started realizing, like, sports nutrition or teaching athletes how to eat well is more serious than I used to think. It's not just about performance, but it's also about them being able to maintain their long-term health, and
Mm-hmm.
when they do retire from sport, because we all do at some point,
Sure. Yeah.
you want to be able to
Some
walk
sooner. Yep. Some
and,
later. Yep.
and feel good and
Mm-hmm.
maybe chase your kids around one day or whatever.
Yeah.
So but yeah, like I didn't really know much about nutrition as an athlete. It came later.
Yeah, so I'm curious, when did you actually start with athletics? So was dance first? Was gymnastics first? Did they kind of come together? Did you start that around elementary school or a little bit later?
I started dance and gymnastics at 3.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I
Okay.
started competing at 6 or 7. I started competing, and then it kind of it went from having like 1 or 2 routines to like 8 or 9 for each competition. So it kind of, at 8, it was more than at 7. And each year I just kind of
Yeah.
got more and more into it.
Yeah.
And then around, I want to say, I think it was around 11, like middle school, I didn't do gymnastics full on anymore. It was more it was acro and tumbling. So
Mm.
no more beam or bars or vault or any of that. Those were never really my I liked to
You didn't
tumble.
like those? Huh?
No, not. I love watching them, but yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't
Yeah.
my thing. So it did acro, and dance was really good skill to have. And then in 8th grade was when cheer started. And to be honest, I never liked the cheer part. I wasn't really the rah rah girl, but I
Mm-hmm.
loved to dance and tumble
Mm-hmm.
and the stunts. And I was always the one that got
Mm-hmm.
thrown in the air because I'm small.
Okay. Was that acro or is that part of dance? Like, how does
the ac-
acro different from dance? I can imagine like dance is like, okay, you're on the floor, you're doing routines and stuff, but
yeah.
acro is more in the air. But what are the specifics of that? What does that entail?
Once it becomes where it's just part of your dance, usually it's put into routines. So
Okay.
depending on the competition, sometimes there would be an acro category. So if it was just ballet or tap or jazz, you weren't allowed to do acro in there. It had to be considered an acro routine.
Hmm.
But when I've seen now from my friends who have daughters that dance, it seems like you can put some acro into routines.
Okay.
And if anything, it just boosts the complexity or the skill level of your routine. So I don't know if that it's separate anymore.
Hmm.
And then the same thing happened with cheer. If you can tumble, you kind of go up on you're going to get a spot more easily. And I
Okay.
know a lot of competitive cheer wasn't as big when I was in it as it is now. I know so many people with daughters who are 7, 8 years old already they're doing cheer lessons and camps and competitions like 3, 4 days a week, and it's become kind of like hockey or a sport where
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
traveling and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. And so now I think a lot of the high school and even maybe middle school teams are requiring that you can do a certain level of tumbling, like at least a back handspring, to even make it on the team. So
Wow.
for me, it was just kind of a bonus that I could do it, and it was kind of a cool thing
Uh-huh.
because only a couple of us could. But
Yeah.
now it seems to be
Okay.
a lot.
It's kind of like a little bit more of a prerequisite with certain skills, to
Ye-
get
ye-
at that level. Okay.
Yeah, for the more
Mm-hmm.
competitive teams, anyways.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that kind of stuff, so you're talking about dancing, moving very quickly, being explosive, getting up into the air, that kind of stuff. I would imagine having a good strength to weight ratio is beneficial for that. So that kind of like leads me into, weight management, or this influence that you were talking about, just a few minutes before, about, needing to be skinny or needing to be thin or as little body weight, on your frame as possible. So when did that kind of influence start to show up for you? At what point throughout your athletic competitive career, whether in middle school or high school, at what level did that start showing up? Hey, this is a little bit more of a bigger of a deal. Coaches want you to, be at this kind of weight a little bit more frequently. Where does that start showing up?
So for me, I was only 8 or 9. I think it was, I want to say third grade, maybe fourth grade. And it wasn't actually directed at me, or they didn't single anyone out. So I think the intent was good,
Sure.
but it caused a lot of harm unknowingly. So
Right.
they basically weighed us all one day. We were, every August was the studio's like big performance. It wasn't a competition. It's just you put on, we would have like 8 different, what did they call, like themes? Like it might be Wizard of Oz or Peter, like there were different ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a bigger room that we would practice the bigger route where there's a lot of people. And one day we just came in and they were weighing us all. And again, I think they just did everybody because they didn't want to single anyone out.
Sure.
But that was the first time in my life where it was like I got weighed and there was this stigma to it because they mentioned that, if you can't fit into a certain costume, you're not going to be able to do the routine, or you won't be able to be a part of the group.
Okay.
So in my mind, even though I was not overweight at all, it became a fear of, well, if I do gain weight or if I'm fat, I'm not going to be able to compete, or I'm not going to be able to be a part of this number because I won't fit in the costumes.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point on, it was this constant fear in my mind.
Yeah.
And my mom caught me, I would like punch my stomach, like if I thought it was too big or something. And again, if you go look
Around
at
that
pictures of
time
me
when,
at 8,
yeah.
9 years old, I
Yeah.
was tiny.
Yeah.
But I would she saw me doing that and got really concerned,
Yeah.
rightfully so.
Right.
And luckily, my main competitive dance coach did talk to me, and she was a professional dancer on the strip. I think it was Siegfried and Roy at the time.
Okay.
So, she had a lot of experience. She'd seen what eating disorders can do.
Yeah.
And she told me a story about how one of her fellow dancers ended up, at the time, it was a poop bag, because I didn't know the technical name
Yeah.
yet. But basically, now that I know more about it, she lost part of her colon, or she had so much GI damage that she needed a bag. And thankfully, it was enough to scare me at that age about truly becoming anorexic.
Yeah.
But I still, the fear of gaining weight and the disordered eating was still there. It just thankfully was never full-blown starvation mode or anything like that.
So you got both ends of the spectrum. You got unintentionally, you got fear tactics here, but also you have, weight loss, weight management over here. Both people meaning well. All right. At least to me, it seems like most people have good intentions, for their kids growing up. You're 8, 9 years old, or the coaches, I feel like they have good intentions, but they're also focused on the success of their team, right?
Yeah.
And having the best athletes. So I think, some are a little bit more concerned with that than others. But that is such an early age, to be starting to think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And would you say it tends to kind of stick with you into adulthood a little bit? Like, if you're not aware of it, how can that impact, somebody, as an adult, 20s, 30s and beyond? What do you think?
Oh, it definitely, I mean, for some people, unfortunately, it lasts their entire life. You know, they're in their 60s, 70s. I see it when I work with clients where they still struggle with this. I see it daily almost, um, with mostly women. It can happen and with the men too, but much grander scale with the females.
Mhm.
Um, I think for me, my nutrition degree and just really learning all that I know about how food affects body weight, but also how it affects our health, and that they're not, you don't have to be super thin to be healthy. And
Sure.
in fact, a lot of people are unhealthy or not performing their best because they are too thin
Mm.
sometimes. So the what I've seen and what I've learned, I think really helped me finally let go of most of that. And it doesn't mean that I every day I'm like, oh, I wouldn't want to, maybe slim down a little or something. It
Mm.
doesn't ever necessarily completely go away, but I would never eat in a way that was detrimental to my health to achieve a certain body composition. Like that part of me that's gone now,
That's
thankfully.
great. Yeah. So did
Uh,
that kind of follow you into high school? Did you? I'm
oh,
assuming you still competed through high school. So can we kind of talk about that a little bit? Like, what was the transition like? Going from middle school, when that kind of started to happen, and that's on your mind, but also performing is on your mind, to a big extent as well. So those 4 years through high school, how did that impact you? Whether
yeah.
in your sport or lifestyle,
Yeah. Looking back, I mean, thankfully, it didn't have a negative enough effect where I ever noticed it in my sport. Now, if we could go back in time and I ate better, like who knows how good could I have been? Or would I have felt that? Would I have actually been healthier?
Mhm.
I'm sure there could have been positive changes. Can't go back, so who knows?
Right.
But I'm sure there would have been differences. But it was never like I never crashed or couldn't do my stuff. And again, I never, thankfully, was full on like not eating or anything. So it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Mhm.
But there's definitely, I mean, I think I stressed over what my body looked like until I
Mhm.
was maybe even like 30. Honestly, I remember being in my garage for whatever reason, cleaning out stuff, and there's pictures. And I found this picture. It was actually college. I was probably 18 or 19. I think it was my first year. And, we were at some party out of town. So you could see my abs and
Okay.
everything. And I looked at this picture and it made me sad because I was like, oh my God, what was I? I spent all of those years thinking I didn't look good enough or trying to look better or just being stressed out about what my stomach looked like. And
Mhm.
now I'm looking at this picture like I should have been happy as could be. Like, look at
Yeah.
me. Like, my
Yeah.
body's awesome.
Yeah.
So it was like, it
Mhm.
made me sad that I like didn't love myself like I should. I loved myself. Like, it wasn't like I had low self esteem, but I was so critical about what my body looked like,
Mhm.
and it looked amazing. And now I'm here
And you didn't
30.
even know it. It's a completely different perspective, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
now I've had my first kid, right? And I'm
Mhm.
30, and it wasn't like I looked bad, but I'm thinking like, oh my God, I would love to like walk out of my house like that and stuff. Like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
And I tried, that's like the moment I remember thinking like, okay, well, when you're 40, you're going to do the same thing about right now. You're going to look back and be like, what was I complaining about?
Mhm.
So like from that time on, have always tried to like embrace or like be happy with what I have or what I'm make the best of what you're working with kind
Right.
of thing.
Yeah.
And enjoy it while you
Yeah.
can because
Yeah.
in 20 years you're going to look back and wish you still had what you had at 30, and I'm sure at
Mhm.
70 you look back at
Yep,
what you had
yep.
at 50.
See, that's
So
why life experience is so good, and I constantly remind myself all the time, and I shouldn't remind myself of this, but it pops up in my head a lot. I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back to high school knowing what I know now with that perspective. Or,
right.
but it's just not, it's not life. It's not realistic, but it's fun to think about, like what would I tell myself back
I
then,
know.
or if, we had different influences, on us. So, when did you, so you got through did you compete in college as well too, or after high school, or so high school
No.
was it for you?
Yeah, I could have. I actually had a spot on the here at UNLV, the dance team, and I think I always thought it was I didn't have my priorities straight, but now I often wonder, was I just ready for a break? I loved what I did, but I mean, it was, oh gosh, I don't even know, 20 plus hours a week. I mean, it was my whole life for 15 years. So I don't know. Part of me, it's kind of bad to even admit, but I guess I wanted to like party at the tailgates rather than perform at them. Like,
That's not bad to
if
admit, I
I'm
don't
being
think.
really
I
honest.
mean, you and every other undergrad, pretty much.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I joined like I rushed a sorority with my best friend.
hmm
Um, and like, so it was, we met all these new friends and I just wanted to have a social life.
hmm
And
Well, I
at the
bet that was
time
very good for your mental health, though, right? Kind of
yes and
transitioning from
no.
such a hardcore like focus on dance and gymnastics to then kind of like, okay, yeah, I mean, your liver probably took a little bit of a hit there, but
Yeah.
but but to be able to transition from that kind of life, to a life where now you're able to, hang out with people a little bit more, make some new friends, have some more experiences and that kind of stuff. So I bet it was beneficial in that way, but
Yeah,
mhm.
a little more structure
It would
probably
have
would
been
have been a
nice.
good thing.
Yeah.
Or like if I could have blended the two, it would have been healthier for sure.
Yeah. I think you're a little
Um,
too hard on
I
yourself
think
though
I
there.
went to the extreme, like, and now in my professional life, that's why I'm always I love the idea of balance and moderation because
hmm
now I'm out drinking every night almost, and like that wasn't healthy either.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah.
some of the things I deal with now were because I did not take good care of myself for probably like 8 years, from like
Mm,
18 to 24, 25, somewhere around there.
okay.
6, 7 years.
Okay.
But so yeah, in some ways it was great. I did have experiences. I did learn from them. Some of them I wouldn't have had if I probably was dancing like that many hours a week still.
Sure.
But at the same time, keeping it somewhat probably wouldn't have been a bad thing either.
Okay.
So
All right. So during that time though, you're working on your nutrition sciences bachelor's, right?
that was
Or
actually psychology. So
that was
nutrition was
psychology.
my second degree.
No way. I didn't know
Yeah,
this. Oh, well,
my
I would have told
first
you I was
degree.
a psychology major as well.
Oh,
So for my undergrad, yeah.
oh yeah.
But okay, so you're psychology. So you double majored psychology and nutrition sciences, or
I
how did that?
did psychology, had a few years off where I was just really figuring out what I wanted to do. Part of it, my mom tried to steer me away from this, but I didn't listen. But I started like bartending and cocktailing at 21 because, in
Oh, okay.
Vegas,
Yeah, yeah.
it's,
Common.
yeah, and you make really good money.
Yeah, you know what? I'd be lying if I didn't say I've thought of that too at times, but I always get back to personal training, if I need a little bit extra, but yeah, you did what you could at the time, right? So,
Yeah, and I mean,
hmm
when you're 21, 22, like, it's fun, you're making good money.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there was that. It was hard I remember the graduate program, it was a PhD program. And I mean, I had the grades, I had the experience. That is one thing I kept up, even though I was partying too much. Like, I still kept my grades up. I had a lot
That's
of,
impressive.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of like volunteer work or internship stuff.
hmm
So I was a strong candidate for the program, but at the time, I want to say the stipend was like $1,000 a month.
Whew.
So here I
It's a
am.
little steep.
Here I am. I'm like, well, I can make that in a week, working like maybe
Yeah,
3 nights, if
yeah.
that.
hmm
So it was hard to like grasp like how am I going to how am I going to support my lifestyle?
Yeah, yeah.
So it deterred me away from it. But then I threw around law school. Like I actually took the LSAT, that threw
Wow,
around an
more stuff I didn't know.
MBA.
Okay.
Yeah,
hmm
like I was really trying to figure out what I
Yeah.
wanted to do.
hmm
So there was like I think a 3 year break, 3 or 4 year break before I went back for the nutrition sciences degree.
Okay, gotcha. You had some time to mess around a little bit, try a few new things out, and then you went back. So there was probably something that prompted going back for nutrition sciences. What can you
He-
pick anything out
Oh yeah.
specifically?
So it was actually, so my father passed away of pancreatic cancer in
Sorry to hear that.
2008. Thank you. He was not the person who like lived a healthy lifestyle and then shockingly
Hmm.
got a cancer. He was
Okay.
very unhealthy. He didn't eat well. He drank. He smoked. He had type 2 diabetes, which at the time I didn't know all the signs and symptoms of that being very poorly managed.
Hmm.
But looking back, I mean, it was not managed well at all. Like his vision was
Mm.
terrible. He lost a ton of weight. So now, knowing what I know, that decline, I'm like, oh, that would have been very obvious to me
Hmm.
had it happened later, in life. But
Yeah.
anyways, once he passed away, I found myself being really interested in health. Like there was, so Dr. Oz was kind of big at that time, and there was another show on TV called The Doctors, and I was like watching those each day. I just was very interested all of a sudden in it,
Hmm.
and I was studying to take the test for the MBA program. And I had even come to UNLV and talked to the people. I was getting ready to apply, and as I'm getting more interested in health, I reached out to one of my friends. She works in healthcare, and then her husband works in neurology. And he let me shadow him one morning at the hospital because I was like, I think like I'm throwing around going back, like maybe PA school.
Okay.
So I decided to change paths, but for PA school, I needed quite a few biologies and chemistries that I didn't have with the psychology degree because I think I only had like one of each. And I enrolled here. I was just going to do those prereqs and then do that. But UNLV took forever to get me re-enrolled. I don't know why, because I had all my stuff. I
Way to
mean,
go, UNLV.
yeah, not shocking now, right? But
Yeah.
it's literally, I think school started on Monday, and it was like a Thursday before I was officially enrolled in. So I go to like enroll in classes. They were awful. You know how those biology, well, I don't know if you did classes here, but those
Yeah,
biologies
back
and
in Illinois.
chemistries, they
Hmm.
fill up quickly. There
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
aren't that many options.
Hmm.
So I'm like, well, shoot. But as I'm scrolling, or as I was trying to enroll, I realized that because I had all the credits from my first degree, if I declared a major, I could register as a senior and get first dibs on the classes.
Okay.
So I scrolled through the list and I see nutrition sciences, and I'm like, well, I had no clue there was like a degree related to nutrition, but I love food. I'm a foodie, and I'll just do that. And
Okay.
I also the prereqs for the nutrition were like almost identical, like everything I needed for the pre-med route.
Hmm.
So I'm like, okay, well, perfect. I don't have to do this degree. I'm just gonna declare it as a major, get all these prereqs out, and then I can just leave.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I'll be
Yeah.
done.
Uh-huh.
So it was really by default. I didn't know what a dietitian was. I had no clue. But that first semester, all my classes were either nutrition or math. Like I didn't have any of the science because they were all full.
Hmm.
And as I took the nutrition classes, I was like, oh, this is really
Stuff is actually pretty
inter-
cool, huh?
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like really
Hmm.
interesting. And then I kind of kept going. And the second semester, I did have the bio and the chem, but
Hmm.
I also had the nutrition. And I started realizing how connected it was to our
Mm.
health. Like I had no
Very.
clue
Yeah.
how all these different diseases and nutrition were related. Like truly had no clue at the time.
Mm.
But I also realized I was really good at like the harder stuff.
Were you? Okay.
So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just do med school. Screw PA school. I'll just be the doctor. Like I'm really good at this. And then I got pregnant with
Okay.
Rocco.
Okay.
And so then, he comes along and it was like, oh, med school I could probably pull off, but residency with a baby or a young kid, I don't know if that's like I want to be a part of his life and I want to be around. I don't like his
Yeah.
pediatrician. Her husband's also a doctor, and she said they literally they'd have to pass the baby off at residency. So she would do like her 12 hours
Wow.
and then she'd hand the baby, take
Hmm.
the baby, and
Yeah.
then he'd go do
Yeah.
his.
What a routine.
Yeah, and I was like, I just
Yeah.
don't know. I
Yeah.
don't think that's the life I want as a mom now that,
Hmm.
it just changed
Understandable. Yeah.
everything. So I'm like, all right, I'll stick with the nutrition. I could still maybe do PA school if I want, but I like the nutrition. It's still very involved with it's helping with what I wanted to help with as a PA or a doctor anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, I ended up doing the nutrition route, and
Okay.
it interestingly, if you include the master's and the internship, it's probably 1 year shy of what med school and residency would have been anyways.
Wow. Okay. So you got all that time, but you actually did it, in a sustainable way, right?
But yeah, I think it was, even though it was maybe only one fewer year, it was
Mm-hmm.
still more flexible than that would have been. So at
Mm-hmm.
least I could work it all
Yeah.
in. It wasn't easy, but it definitely gave me more flexibility.
Okay. So after your master's in kinesiology, that's when did you go straight into the RD path, or how does that work? I'm not too familiar with it.
I got my RD first. So I did
Mm-hmm.
my internship right after my undergraduate,
Oh, okay.
went right into the internship, took my exam, and was
Mm-hmm.
an RD. Worked for 1 year as an RD, and then started the master's.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, because once I started my master's and I had the assistantship,
Mm-hmm.
since I already had my credential, I could actually teach rather than being
Okay.
like the graduate assistant. So I was able to have my own classes
Okay.
throughout my master's. So instead of being like a research assistant, I was basically a part-time instructor.
Okay.
It just got paid as a
Yeah.
graduate assistant.
Mm-hmm.
But now, so as of recently, a master's degree is required to become a dietitian.
Ah,
So
okay.
now
Okay.
the route is, I think you do your 2 years master's and your internships. I don't know if you're doing them simultaneously, or I think you do your master's and then your internship,
Hmm.
but you can't sit for the RD exam and become an RD without having that
The
master's
master's
now.
first. Wow. How things have changed, huh?
Yeah, and they've been
Yeah.
talking about it was supposed to actually go into effect 2020, but
Sure.
2020
Yeah, we got thrown a curveball there a little bit.
it
So.
screwed everything up. So I think it
Yeah.
was just 2024
Mhm.
that this, hopefully it wasn't, no, I'm pretty sure 2024 is when they actually were like, okay, it's in effect now.
Okay, gotcha.
So
All right. So when did the business start then? Um, how soon after that, I
the
guess?
business started unofficially, but where I was seeing clients on the side, like starting to build that up, was 2019. So that would have
Mm.
been after I graduated.
Mhm.
But I was still teaching here. So I
Okay.
finished my master's and was teaching part time
Mhm.
at UNLV.
Which classes did you teach?
At that time, it was Nutrition 311, which is the like assessment, nutrition assessment. So
Mm.
there's various components of that.
Surveys, questionnaires, that kind of stuff,
Yeah, so it's
looking for
like the
patterns.
dietary
Mm-hmm.
nutrition or assessment, but also like body composition.
Okay.
There's the laboratory values part of it. So all the different parts of a
Mm-hmm.
full assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I taught that lab, and then I think I was still also teaching the nutrition 121. So that's like the big
Okay.
elective where you have 100 students.
Okay.
They're not nutrition majors, and we have a sports nutrition like that too. So we have the elective for non-majors, and then we have our senior level class for
Mm.
actual nutrition majors.
Okay.
So I taught the non-nutrition major ones, and then I taught our nutrition students the lab.
Okay. Gotcha. Do you enjoy that? I mean, you're telling me about maybe going back to teach, at some point, but you're still brainstorming it a little bit. But I mean, as long as nutrition is involved, I think like you would be happy. So, but it
Yeah,
seems like you really, really enjoy working with people. Obviously, since you started your business and everything. So,
I do, but I actually ended up really liking teaching.
yeah.
I
Okay.
never thought that's one of the things. I never in a million years would. It was a hard no. Like being a
Mm.
teacher I had no interest. In fact, I was kind of repelled by it.
Mm.
And then I think it was my senior year, or maybe during my internship, I taught like one of the upper level classes as like part of one of my projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, this was kind of fun. So then during the master's, that was my assistantship job.
Okay.
And at first I was kind of like, especially I wanted the complex classes. I wanted to teach like pathophysiology or what do we call it in nutrition? It's advanced human metabolism.
Yeah. Okay.
And I wanted to teach those classes because I liked that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you like all the biology and chemistry
Yeah.
and all the hard stuff.
I liked
so.
that. But then,
good on you for that.
Yeah. So at first, the Nutrition 121, I was like, eh. But after a semester, it grew on me because I realized at one point, like, these people are like my clients. Like, they represent the general population who doesn't have a background in nutrition and that I'm trying to help in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So it when I started recognizing that, it made me really like that class because that was kind of their first introduction to all of these things. But then what kind of prompted the private practice as well and the courses I just did was I would notice when I was in class teaching, I'm like, God, I wish I could bring my private practice clients in here because I can only teach you so much stuff in 30 to 60 minutes, right? And it's impossible to do, plus work on your personalized stuff. But then when I would read my students, like projects sometimes, I would notice that they don't quite get the nuances either, or sodium, for instance. Sometimes their reviews of their diet, they would be like, yeah, okay, I know I'm getting too much sodium and I need to cut that back. But like once in a while they were maybe an athlete or something. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
actually,
and they're still eating like they're an athlete, right?
Yeah, I'm like, for you, this sodium level really isn't that high. But those are the types of things you can't always teach. You don't have time. Like you're already cramming to get through all the course content that they make you like you have to cover, so you don't get to get the nuances. So it's like if I could combine the two, that would be so ideal.
Yeah.
So they kind of like helped me with each other, and then prompted with like, okay, this is what I want to do one day in my own business.
Got it. Okay. So you mentioned the general population earlier. I kind of want to transition into more nutrition talk here a little bit because we're pretty much there. So the general population basically is your average Joe, average Jane, everyday gym goer, just want to be fit and healthy, want to be able to play with the kids for a long time if they're a parent, or just want to be able to go through their daily life without all these nagging aches and pains or things that poor nutritional choices are related to. So I'm going to throw a pretty wild question at you. So with regard to the general population, is there an optimal diet or the perfect diet, for anybody, a universal diet? Because there is so much confusion in the nutrition space, which I'm sure you are aware of. There's keto, there's vegan, there's carnivore, there's paleo. What else is there? Yeah, all this stuff, low carb, high carb, low fat. How do you navigate through all that mess when you're getting constant feedback from everywhere, particularly social media and the internet, right? And you just don't even know where to start, and you just want to throw in the towel and say, I quit. I'm just, I'm going to rebel and just drink soda and eat potato chips the rest of my life because I don't know what to do. So how does somebody start to navigate all that stuff to start making better nutritional choices for themselves?
Yeah. So there is a lot to unpack. It's confusing out there. I get why people are confused. And unfortunately, I feel like the voices that people listen to the most, you listen to the loudest person often, right? But the loudest people typically aren't the ones you should be listening to. They're just really good at selling it, and they sound so confident. And a lot of us, I feel that know what we're talking about we're not those super loud people, but we
Yeah.
also know that I think there's something like I am so cautious about what I say because I know that certain things don't apply to everybody.
Mm.
So I don't come across as like bold, but those people, they don't care, right? So they're just like, this is good for everyone and this is what you do.
Hmm.
And it's not true, but it sounds like it is. So
Right.
it's hard to know because it can be very nicely packaged, even
It
though it's
can
a
be. It
horrible
can be.
source.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and for another problem we have too is like, people think if you're a doctor that you know everything about health. So if they're out there saying these things about nutrition, people believe it because it's a
Hmm.
doctor. But what a lot of people don't realize is that most doctors have hardly any nutrition education
That's what I
at
wanted to bring
all.
up. Yeah. So if you know, you were thinking about med school at one point. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming you know some doctors, and I'm assuming you've done your homework and your research on what's involved in med school. And the thing I keep hearing many, many different professionals, not just nutritionists, but also MDs, say that there's hardly any nutritional intervention training during med school.
That
Like none.
it, that's true. There.
Hmm.
So my friends who have been doctors or like doctors that I've had these conversations with, the very large, actually all of them, when they mention med school training, it's usually one day, and it's either very very basic nutrition guidelines or it's nutrition. So like if you were in a hospital and something bad happened and you can't eat, you have to start usually like a tube feed or maybe
Yeah.
even through the blood, just
Yeah.
depending on the situation. So my friend who's an anesthesiologist, she said we got like maybe 8 hours max about basically how to get something like that started if the dietitian or maybe a certified nurse isn't there to do it. They
Mm.
can at least get like know enough to get it started safely. And that was her only nutrition. She
Mm.
said she didn't even get like the basic nutrition and diabetes or like general health education. It
Mhm.
just wasn't included in the
Yeah.
med school. So they hardly have any nutrition. And even it's mind blowing. This was one of the biggest eye openers to me my first year working as a dietitian, because I did work primarily with like insurance based, and
Mhm.
so people who had medical conditions, not like your healthy athlete just wanting to perform better. And like some of the worst advice that I heard them telling me they got came from their doctor, like their kidney doctor or their
Mm.
endocrinologist, their doctor for their diabetes.
Mhm.
And I was floored at first, like, why would they say this to that person? That is so not accurate or not good advice.
Mhm.
But then I started realizing that disconnect there. And I even had patients that year that were like nurses and doctors, and they were my patients. And that made it even more like I realized even more like how this huge disconnect between nutrition and lifestyle and disease management,
Yeah.
and especially prevention. That's
Yeah.
like a whole nother, that's even further away.
Mhm.
Um, but I still, it's really frustrating is to this day, I go through this constantly where I'm like, why don't you just refer out to a dietitian?
That was my question. So I do not know very many doctors, or I know a couple. However, I also don't spend a lot of time at the primary care because I take care of myself. So, I don't go there, very much. There's no need to, like they don't see you unless you have a very, really serious issue. But say somebody, did go there and nutrition was a big issue for them. You mentioned, I don't know why they don't refer out. Is that even an option? Like, is that something insurance covers? So you go to your primary care and they're going to, all right, the PCP doesn't have the nutritional knowledge, so they don't want to tell them anything. But hey, I'm going to refer you out to this registered dietitian. Is that a thing? Is that an option for people to do?
Yeah, so there's a few ways it could work. If the patient's wanting to use their insurance, there are dietitians who bill insurance. So it could be a private practice you're sending them out to, and then that dietitian bills. You could also bring a dietitian into your practice, and the office could even handle the billing if they wanted to and just
Mm-hmm.
pay the dietitian.
Okay.
And then the company I work for part time is a telehealth insurance based company. So doctors can refer their people there through that as well. So
Mm-hmm.
the nice thing about that is if the maybe like they have trouble get, or it's hard to like get in person to a dietitian, but they could on their lunch break hop on a computer and do
Mm-hmm.
it. Or if they live in different states, even they can still, as long as the dietitian is licensed or able to see someone in that state, you can see someone from anywhere. So if you need a certain
That's good.
specialty that
Mm-hmm.
maybe someone locally doesn't really have,
Yeah.
it widens the options for you. So
Okay.
there's a lot of ways that even through insurance, like a
Yeah.
patient could work with a dietitian.
Okay.
It does come down to the insurance plans, though. So, like,
Yeah, that was my
different.
next question. Like, are people capped as far as how long they can actually see the dietitian? Because I know, for example, I used to have insurance where, so this isn't a stigma anymore or anything, but I've been doing therapy for a little bit over 8 months now. So one-on-one, one time per week, it's been awesome. It's been life-changing for me. But that was through the VA, through community care, which is one of the programs that they have. So I was lucky to find that. So they cover it. However, previous insurance I had for mental health, they would give you 3 sessions for an entire year.
Yeah.
3 sessions. Is that what nutrition is like as well? Or is it a little better?
It depends on your insurance. So
Okay.
some of them, there's unlimited visits. They could see
Mm.
me every other week for the entire year, and the years following under their insurance. So, and then there's some that you get 3 visits a year, and there's the most restrictive is the Medicare because that's 3 visits a year, but it's also only for you have to have a diagnosis of diabetes or chronic kidney disease. And
Okay.
then,
So you have to be pretty far along down that path already.
which,
So,
yeah, so you're
yeah.
already, and then I'm like, well, I can't completely turn someone's habits around in 3 sessions. So
Mm-hmm.
that's unfortunate. But there are many insurance plans that cover anywhere from 10 to 26 or more per
Mm-hmm.
year. And they aren't nearly as restricted. Some you can bill for almost like it can be preventative, it could be obesity, it could be a health condition, sometimes even
Okay.
like symptoms, like
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a diagnosis. So it really depends on the individual's plan
Mm-hmm.
what's covered. But some are phenomenal, and then
Mm-hmm.
some are still
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
lacking.
Gotcha. Well, I went through, was it 3 different therapists before I found my fourth one who was able to do a lot for me and actually like not just listen to me vent, but actually like get into some of the root causes of certain things. So sometimes you might need to bounce back and forth between dietitians and see if which one's a good fit. Just like don't for the listeners out there, don't give up. Just because one didn't work out for you. Continue trying and looking at different points of view, different experiences, with your practitioners and stuff. So, but that's good to know that those options are actually there because I probably wouldn't have known. I probably would have just assumed that, no, they don't give anything, nutrition wise when you go in. So,
Yeah.
but.
For the people, your original question, sorry, got
Mm-hmm.
a little
No, that's fine.
off
That's
on the
important to
insurance
know.
thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think there's a universal perfect diet. There are some principles that I would say would apply to almost everybody.
Let's hear about those principles. I love principles. All
Yeah.
right.
So, well, and these are kind of like, it's not getting into the nitty gritty, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like, we all need the right amount of calories and the right amount of all the essential nutrients. So, like your carbs, your protein, your fat, the different vitamins and minerals and water. As humans, we do need a certain amount of those things to function and optimally and thrive. Um, so that's for almost everybody, it's like, okay, are we getting enough of these things? That's ideally that's your healthy diet. Is it
Mm-hmm.
giving you everything that you need? Not too much, but not too little.
So
But
along with that, my next question is, you said not eating too much or too little. So is it common in the United States, for example, to undereat? It seems like overeating is a big issue, but how about undereating? Is that common, and what sort of population would you see that in?
it's surprisingly more common than you would think by looking at our health stats and our obesity rates and stuff like that. But this is also where it gets tricky, right? Is the what's too much for one could be too little for another, and vice
Right. Yeah, it's
versa.
all individualized,
So
right?
that's
Mm-hmm.
where that comes in. And then there's the issue too sometimes of we're getting too much calories, but we're way lacking in certain nutrients.
Mm,
Or we're under eating calories, but we're still getting too much of certain things.
mm,
So sometimes it depends from person to
mm.
person. Um, there, the where I see the most like truly under eating, is
Yeah.
from a calorie
Mm-hmm.
perspective,
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah.
Athletes,
Okay.
very, very common.
Mm-hmm.
But also people who are really concerned about weight.
Okay.
They will
Yeah.
under eat, not to the point of where they're gonna like be skinning, but like true
Mm-hmm.
starvation.
Mm-hmm.
But they're under eating to the point where their bodies, they're basically, it's backfiring on them,
Yeah.
and they're getting the
So,
opposite
yeah.
results.
So educate me on this a little bit more, and the listeners too. Okay. So through my research and talking to people and listening to other podcasts and stuff, a common theme continues coming up. Okay. So, a person, all right, who wants to lose weight will go into caloric restriction, one form or another, right? You name the diet, whatever. So they're in this caloric restriction. Initially, they see some weight loss. All right. So they're like, oh, yeah, this is working. Right. But after a certain point, that caloric restriction continues and they plateau. But they continue to go into a deficit after deficit, day after day, week after week, and they do not understand why the weight still will not come off. So, um, you can correct me if I'm wrong here a little bit, but it has to do with your metabolism. And when, after so long of going undernourished, basically, you're not giving your body the amount of calories it needs, it starts to hold on to body weight and body fat, all right, to spare whatever it has left. So it doesn't want to drop off anymore. That's why you're seeing the plateau. And the only way to reverse that is, I've heard a couple different terms thrown out there, is a reverse diet or a bulk, basically, where you're actually starting to eat more, give your body what it needs to function optimally. And interestingly enough, people start to see the weight come off a little bit. What do you know? So is that accurate? Have you seen that
Yep.
with your clients a lot?
I, so when I usually after a program, and sometimes I'm not great about this because I will forget, but I try to get like a feedback or a testimonial form, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and several of the ones that I've collected, one of the questions was like something about were there any unexpected results that you received, in a positive way. And a lot of them were like, yeah, I actually eat more and I have a better relationship with food. Because a
There
lot
you
of people,
go.
when they think work with a dietitian, they think I'm
Yeah.
going to take their food away. And they
Right.
think, some people out there think, like, if you work in weight loss or you help people with that, that you're pro diet,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So
Right.
in their
Yeah.
minds, it's a diet and we're
Yeah.
going to
Oh,
lose
which
weight.
diet am I doing?
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
after we work together, and most of these people are people that worked with me for 6+ months. So it's not your like
Yeah. It's not
one, two,
immediate.
three session.
Mm-hmm.
But that is those two things come up repetitively where they're eating more than they were initially, and they actually have a much healthier relationship with food as opposed to what you would the opposite
That's
happening.
awesome. That's awesome. And what does that healthier relationship with food kind of look like? So I hear it all the time, and I, preach to my clients as well, about having a healthier relationship with food. I have an idea, of what that means and what that might look like. And it looks like different things for different people. But what does that look like to you?
Um, Usually it's, I would say, one, understanding what the different foods and different nutrients do for you. So understanding why we need enough, but also how too much can be a bad thing too. So that when you're looking at the foods, you don't have to necessarily see them as good or bad, but like, hey, this food does all of this for me, whereas this one could be okay if I have a little, but if I have too much, it's going to be this. So it's being as least restrictive as necessary. So
Okay.
yes, we do need to learn that sometimes we have to cut back on certain things, or certain things aren't going to serve us well if we have too much, but not necessarily seeing them as forbidden either,
That's a great
because
point. Yeah.
most people, when you look at like overeating,
Hmm.
and especially on like binges of things that we just know aren't good for you in large quantities, but a lot of the times it comes from them being overly restrictive the whole week or even a month or however
Hmm.
long, and then they just binge and they have
Hmm.
severe cravings. They don't control themselves around those foods. So if we can teach people to be as least restrictive as medically necessary and learn how to eat more mindfully. So, mindful eating, not
Hmm.
like super restrictive eating, but mindfulness. As they continue to learn and practice those, usually, if there's a bowl of candy sitting there now, they don't care. Like, if they don't want it or they're not hungry or they don't even really like it, they won't just sit and eat it.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of people, they will, because that's just their habit. It's
Yeah.
just there and they just do it, and they're not, there's no mindfulness at all.
Hmm.
But then they'll feel guilty and then they'll go starve
That's a big
themselves,
one,
and
feeling guilty. Yeah.
yeah, it's this
Yeah. Yeah.
horrible cycle, and
Yeah.
they can never get the results they want.
Mm.
And more importantly, sometimes they get the results, but they can't maintain them
Hmm.
because they didn't, it's not a healthy relationship, or it's not like, they're not really healthy habits. They're overly restrictive habits that they can't keep up.
Right.
So then the results go away.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, one of those big themes that you hit on was the mindfulness and knowing how foods affect you. Just having that education of, okay, this is how a piece of grilled chicken is going to affect my body, but this is also how a cookie is going to affect my body. How I'm going to feel based on eating each one of these, but also accepting whenever you eat that cookie or whenever you go out, and say it's an important event for you, you're at a family event or something like that, and it's a good chance for you to be with other people that you care about, but there's usually unhealthy foods associated with that. Are you going to restrict yourself all the time, or are you going to know how that food affects you? You're going to accept the consequences of eating that particular food, all right, and not give yourself that guilt afterwards because you've accepted the consequences of, hey, all right, I ate 3 cookies. I might have a little bit of a stomachache tomorrow, or digestive issues or something like that, or I might have a little bit of brain fog or whatever else comes along with it, right? But to me, it seems like that is one of those principles that's really important for sustained healthy eating, is to not restrict so much that you are just like, going nuts every single day,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And over time, too, people will go from having three, like, as they change their habits for the better, they might have an event where they ate 3 cookies, right?
mhm,
But then when we talk, they're like, oh, but I felt really crappy afterwards. So in a way, it was like, okay, maybe you could say it was a mistake, but in a way it was a good mistake because you've learned because
Right.
you're actually paying attention. And now
Awareness.
the
Yeah.
next time they have a family event or a holiday, they don't have they might have one cookie
Mm-hmm.
because they remember, like, you know what, I had three last time, but I really didn't like the way I felt after, and I don't want to
Yeah.
feel that way again. So I'm just going to have one this time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come back and they're like, I had one and I felt great. And then that behavior will continue because
Mm-hmm.
now they're actually paying attention to how they
Right.
feel
Mm-hmm.
and how when I do this, I feel this way. And when I do this, I feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do I want? And then, over time, you keep making better choices
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes maintainable. But
Right.
that's another thing, too, is people like, I always try to tell people, like, sometimes you just got to put the blinders on and you've got to stop listening to all the things because it's getting in your head. And you
Mm-hmm.
just, like, let's say they decided to work with me, like, you trust me or you wouldn't have signed up with me. So just, like, tune out all the other noise and we're just going to work on one thing at a time so that you can get really good at that one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then we build upon that thing. So
Yeah.
it's not going to happen in a month. It might not even all happen in 3 months, but you're going to continuously get better. And then 1, 2, 3 years down the road, it's easy for you. You can maintain this. This is your
Mm-hmm.
norm. It's not a diet. It's not
Yeah.
stressful. You know what to do, but you just have to it's practice. Like, you get a little
Right.
better each month, and
Mm-hmm.
then eventually you're really good at it.
Yeah.
So it's starting, you know, take things one step at a time. When you try to do too much, and that's with anything really in life, I'm learning through business and stuff too, is when you try to do too much, you end up like paralyzed and you quit, or you get
Mm.
overwhelmed, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just a dumpster fire. So it's like, just realize that it's a process. It's not like a sprint.
Right. Definitely. And, we're, as a society, we're just always naturally fed that, these 30-day quick fixes or whatever, they might work short term, but like you said before, inevitably, they're not sustainable, in the long term unless you have those principles, developed. So,
Yeah.
so what is maybe kind of like one or two things, the general population, average Joe, average Jane can start doing today regarding their nutrition to start moving that needle in the right direction?
Yeah. I think it's becoming aware of what you're actually doing is the best first step, because you can't really make changes if you don't
Mm-hmm.
really know what you're doing. So I usually have people log their intake and their lifestyle for a week, and it doesn't have to be on a phone, like a calories and macros tracker. I mean, it could be in your notes app or even a piece of paper, but really recognizing your patterns, if
Mm.
anything, like, you don't worry about the numbers yet. Just what are you doing? Are you eating 3 meals? Are you eating snacks? Are you snacking constantly? Like, what are you actually doing? And why are you doing it too? Are you hungry? Are you bored? Are
Mm.
you stressed out? Like, the why, especially for snacks. Like, are you snacking because it's been 3 hours and you're actually hungry and you can't have another meal for a couple hours? Or do you snack on whatever is around, just like mindlessly?
Yeah, yeah. Or
Um,
there's an emotion attached to it or something like that, like
yeah. So, like,
boredom or stress. Yeah.
what are
Mm-hmm.
you eating and why? And then even things too, though, like sleep. Like, what time are you going to bed? Are you sleeping well, or do you get up several times? What time do you wake up? Like, are you how many steps are you getting per day? Are you exercising? Are you sitting for 8 hours or more?
Mm.
Like, but really looking at like what you're doing, because then we
Mm-hmm.
can go and say, okay, I'm skipping meals, or I'm snacking on things that I'm not even hungry, or I'm only getting 5 hours of sleep every night.
Mm.
I get 3,000 steps a day, or maybe I'm training too much. Maybe I'm not having a rest day. I'm going seven
Yeah,
days a
that's an issue
week,
too, right? Mm-hmm.
cardio
Yeah.
for 3 hours and weights. Like,
Oh man.
so it's
Yeah.
it's seeing those things, so then we
Mm-hmm.
can, like, get your meals get a regular meal pattern going. We can balance out your meals. Maybe you noticed I have no carbs, like my fiber's really low, or I don't have enough protein. It's different things for different people, but we can't really modify all of those things without knowing what you're doing first.
Okay. So building that awareness first, just having that mindfulness and knowing what your current struggles are, because if you don't even know what they are, how can you start to make change, right?
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned, in this, in my opinion, can be one strategy as well, you could start doing as well, is to make sure that you're getting all 3 macronutrients at every meal. Would you say that's a good strategy as well? So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Is there maybe a method of portion control to kind of like measure out how much, they should have of each, or what should their plate look like, for a particular meal?
Yeah. So usually step 2 for me is if you're not eating 3 meals per day, we're starting there. I don't even care what you eat. I mean, I care, but I just want you, breakfast is a common one. So people will tell me the first time they eat is 11 a.m. or 12 p.m., but they got up at like 6. So if it's a banana or a piece of toast to start, that's fine. Sorry, it's the parking lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I just want to get you in the habit of eating 3 meals per day and not going 5, 6, 7 hours without eating, because it usually, when people overeat later in the day, it's because they didn't eat enough earlier. And now
That's a
their
good
hormones
point.
are
Yeah.
going crazy because their body's like, hey, we need fuel.
Yeah.
And that becomes real. It's not even a self-control issue at that point. It's like your hormones are actually fluctuating in a way to try and get you to eat. And you're not going to want to go eat grilled chicken and a salad and an apple. You're going to want a burger and fries.
You're going to want it all. Yeah.
All of it, yeah. So you're not going to, it's really hard to make healthy decisions if you are going several hours without eating. So first step for me is usually like, let's just get you eating 3 consistent meals. And then I want to optimize those meals. So to start, it's if you're just not eating a carb at any of your meals, well, what are some healthy carb options, and let's just get you eating those. Or maybe you're not eating protein at every meal. Let's get you just eating some healthy protein options. And then from there, as we go on, if we need to like fret over the amount more, we will.
Okay.
Sometimes you don't. Sometimes people end up naturally having like a good portion of each. And then sometimes you're like, okay, now that we got you doing this, we're going to clean it up.
Okay.
But for like your average person who isn't all that active, I would say a good rule of thumb is like if you had a plate, half the plate vegetables, maybe a little fruit with it, a quarter your healthy starches, so whole grains or beans or lentils, and then a quarter like a lean protein. Now, if it's somebody who's not necessarily an athlete, but they're still very active, I would split that in thirds. So like a third of the plate, your healthy carbs, a third your vegetables, a third your proteins.
Okay.
If we've got someone super active, athlete, or maybe it's a recreational athlete, but they do marathons or, long endurance events, some days the plate needs to be half carbs, quarter vegetables, quarter proteins.
Yeah.
And it depends too how many times people eat and if they have snacks, because some people do better on like 3 meals. Some people do better with like 4 smaller meals and maybe even 1 or 2 snacks. Like I probably eat 6 times a day. It's just what works for me, but that's not what works for everybody, and it's okay.
Right.
It just, at the end of the day, it's like, how are we getting it all in?
Gotcha.
So,
and that's one of those things I want to get into next is athletes and how they differ from the average person. But let's pause for a second and make sure you don't get a parking ticket.
Oh.
All right, and we're back. Okay, we're really kind of getting into Joe Rogan territory with the length of our podcast here.
How long?
A little over an hour. Nice. Okay, so we're going to continue our discussion here because it's been so much fun. We're going to transition into athletic performance a little bit, which is your specialty, right? So, considering you're an athlete back in the day and everything, and you enjoy working with them, so my first question is, so we talked about the general population, the average person. It seems like a lot, struggle with overeating, some struggle with undereating. But how does the athletic population differ from just living and eating for general health and wellness? So what are kind of some of the biggest differences you've seen working with athletes? And it doesn't have to be any particular sport, but I'm assuming that sports like wrestling and dance and gymnastics, where body weight is a big issue, for those types of sports. I'm guessing maybe you work with a little bit more of those athletes, relatively speaking, but I don't know. So let's talk about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So I do work with those, but I work with a lot of like team sports athletes too.
Okay.
So hockey, lacrosse, baseball,
Hmm.
football. Don't personally have a ton of like basketball players, but I'm not opposed to it. Just had,
Uh-huh.
I guess, I don't know. My kids play certain sports, so you probably
You
get more
tend to
into
see
those
more of those
communities
athletes.
and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like that. And
gotcha.
then when I was here at UNLV, I happened to have a lot of like hockey players in my classes those first couple years. So then,
Hmm.
like I guess connections that you make kind of lead you to who you work with sometimes.
Right.
So, but I do have some dancers and some gymnasts as well. I've had a couple wrestlers. Weight class sports is a tough one for me because I don't agree with a lot of the practices that go on related
Yeah,
to
yeah.
nutrition.
I hear some pretty crazy stories, especially with wrestlers. So,
Yeah,
but yeah.
and since we were speaking of general population, but since some of the general population are former athletes, I will say recently I've had a couple males who are in their early 30s with all kinds of low testosterone being a big issue, and GI symptoms being a big issue. And both were former wrestlers. And
Wow.
I suspect, as do they,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of the things they struggle with now are from all of that constant weight cutting, that
Hmm.
years of cutting and then gaining and then cutting and then gaining and cutting and
Yeah.
then gaining
Yeah.
and not doing it in a healthful way at all
Yeah.
has really messed up their metabolism and
But
just
even
their.
even after stopping wrestling, I'm assuming they stopped doing those types of practices, right? But that still stuck with them
Yeah, and
up
they
until this point.
they did it for a while, and the one does it now, not wrestling, but he does, oh, I'm blanking, jiu-jitsu.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For, I guess you could say fun. That's his,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still 5 days a week and like 90 to 120 minutes, so it's a decent load, but I don't suspect that is what's causing the issues. And yeah, even with things like diabetes and heart health, your habits accumulate over time. So maybe when you're 20, you don't think you notice the effects of what you've been doing for 5, 10 years, but those things are accumulating inside. And then
Mm-hmm.
as you get 25, 30, 35,
Mm-hmm.
it all starts showing up. So what you're doing now does matter, and especially for these athletes, they might not notice the effects yet, but they will show up at one point or another.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
going back to that though, yeah, the wrestlers I've worked with, thankfully, actually wanted to just gain weight, gain muscle, and so that they could be in that class that they want to compete in year round. So
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to achieve a weight that was realistically maintainable for them,
Mm-hmm.
and then they didn't have to worry about all that stuff, and it worked, and they did that, and it was great. But the dancers and the gymnasts, and even the other athletes, the biggest differences tend to be, one, they need more calories than
Yeah.
people who aren't training for
Yep,
3-4 hours a
definitely.
day.
Yep, that's a big one.
Two, they need more carbs. And at
Mm.
certain points of time, we strategically need to add more of the carbs that I typically have to tell people to limit. So the added sugars or the refined carbs. And that's because when we're consuming them near or during exercise, our bodies can't be breaking down fiber and utilizing those carbs quickly enough, but also sometimes the fiber or even fat too close to exercise will cause some GI distress. So the simple carbs are what we need.
Yeah, the type of carb matters. Yeah, especially like, nutrient timing is a big thing, especially with athletes. Like, when should you be eating, certain proportions of macronutrients, right? Your carbs and your proteins primarily. So that is definitely a big issue, and especially around that time of training or competition. So is there a principle you adhere to as far as nutrient timing, with your athletes?
Oh yeah, it's very methodical, which is probably why I like it so much.
Yeah.
That's my jam, and a lot of people don't. But it depends on the athlete. So it depends on the sport, and it depends on the duration and the intensity, and are there multiple events or trainings too? So that the timing depends on all of those things. So the amount and the timing won't necessarily be the same for all athletes, but it's still it's still something I'm always considering. General rule of thumb, though, regardless of the type of athlete, the closer you get toward the exercise, whatever practice, workout, game, race, whatever, the closer you get, you need primarily carbs, and carbs that are going to be easily and quickly digested and absorbed.
Okay. So what's an
carbs
example of a couple of those?
So sometimes if we want liquids, I personally like two brands. I like Scratch and I like Tailwind.
Okay.
It's basically powder
Yeah.
carbs.
Popular with endurance athletes too.
Yes, very. Those are my two favorite brands. I also actually like Body Armor, but if the athlete needs sodium, because that's the other big difference with a lot of the athletes, is they require more salt than most people do. Body Armor doesn't have it in it regularly, so you have to add it to it yourself.
Okay.
Easy to do though, right? So
I thought Body Armor had some sodium. Maybe not.
no, it has potassium because it's made with coconut water, but it doesn't have hardly any. So it's got is it 10 milligrams? It's something very. It's not doing anything.
And
for
is
an
that
athlete.
common with athletes? Because the the narrative or the message that we get as a society is that sodium is bad for you, right? Don't overdo it on your sodium. You're going to get high blood pressure and this and that. But it's different for athletes, isn't it?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's completely different.
Like the two confusing things for athletes is sugar and salt. Because most people do not need to be drinking Gatorade, and they don't need to be they definitely don't need electrolyte packets. That's something that's so popular right now, even with, everyone's putting LMNT in their water.
Yeah, that's popular.
That has 1,000 milligrams of sodium.
Does it? I've never actually looked.
And your average person does not need supplemental 1,000 milligrams of sodium.
But how about the athletes? Would that be necessary for athletes?
Some, yes. So if there's a few things we have to consider to determine how much, or if they need a supplement and they can't just get it from their diet. So depending how much sweat they lose. So if they're someone that's maybe doing 45 to 60 minutes a day, you probably don't. You could probably eat enough to replace those losses. If you're going 90 to 120 minutes, 3 to 4 hours, now it's probably in your favor to consume some during that exercise, so that you're replacing it, some of it at least, while you're actually still training or exercising. And then you can also make up some of that, at your meals. Sports where they wear gear, so like hockey and lacrosse, they sweat even more, so they're losing even more sodium. If you have someone that happens to have a higher sweat rate, or they are a saltier sweater, so higher sweat concentration, even more so, are we going to
Yeah.
need that
And
sodium
and that's
replacement?
something that athletes can actually see, right? On their shirt. Like if you're some lose more sodium, more electrolytes, more than others. So during my training in endurance sports a while back, one of those principles was, to take a look at my shirt after a workout. If it had like, the white,
White.
crust line everywhere, right? Wow, well, I've lost quite a bit. Or
Yep.
I'm a very salty sweater, so I probably should be taking in a little bit more sodium, like during my workouts and stuff, right? So is that seems to be a good principle, to adhere to. But it's kind of subjective, right? But is there
It
is there
is.
more of an objective thing that you do to figure out, like you mentioned, a sweat rate test?
There
So,
are, well, sweat rate, so how much fluid you lose from sweating,
mm,
can be estimated more easily than the sodium concentration of
okay,
your sweat.
yeah, just weigh yourself before and
You
after,
weigh
right? And
yourself before and after. You do want to take into account fluids that you consumed, though. So it does
right.
need to be, you do need to make sure
Mm-hmm.
you know, like actually understand the calculation if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But that gives us a really good idea. Um, that isn't quite as great if you are exercising for like 2+ hours, though, because at that point you're losing, not all that weight is actually coming from sweat loss. So ideally, those calculations are done at some point where you're going for like 60 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
And it, depending too, if you're trying to simulate like, okay, a game or a practice or a race, you want to be doing this measurement at a training or a practice that is similar to what you'll be doing, so that the
Mm-hmm.
intensity is the same and you're actually sweating probably the same or similar amount. So
Mm-hmm.
some people have to do multiple tests so that they can say, like triathletes, for existence, example, like on their bike versus a swim versus a run, they might actually have a different, they might lose a different amount.
Yeah.
So we'll do different testing, or it depending on the weather. So if they're training in the heat, obviously, like in Vegas, let's say, versus training in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
well, their fluid and sodium replacement will be a little different because they're
Yeah.
going to lose more when it's
Mm-hmm.
hot.
Right.
So we have to take into account those things too. Um, Sweat concentration's harder. There are tests you can order to do it, but the couple that are considered reliable or accurate are not the easiest to always get because
Mm-hmm.
they're not sold everywhere. They're not cheap. They're about a couple hundred, $200-$300. So not every athlete is going to do it.
And are those one time use?
Yep.
Ugh.
Which is really, you don't
Yeah.
need multiple times. So sweat concentration doesn't really change. It's the amount of sweat you're losing that would change. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're losing 500 milliliters or you're losing 2,000 milliliters, the percentage of sodium should be similar. So you don't,
Mm-hmm.
that's not something like the sweat loss where you have to measure at like all the different times.
Yeah.
So it is one time, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is kind of pricey for that. So some athlete, your higher level athletes probably have more access to some of this stuff than just your regular endurance athlete or even your college or high school athlete.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we will estimate, and so we'll say, okay, let's aim for 500 milligrams of sodium an hour. How do you respond to that? Are you showing signs that maybe that's still not enough? And if you are, we can add more. And for those people, that's where we start looking at like, okay, do you see white streaks on your clothing or your hat or your
Yeah.
gear? Um, can you taste it? Like sometimes, when they
Oh yeah.
sweat, you
Yeah.
can taste it.
Yep.
Like, does
Yep.
it taste salty, or do your eyes burn when you sweat?
Mm-hmm.
Those tell
All
me
things I've
that,
gotten.
yeah. So those tell me that
Yeah.
like I need to give you more sodium per hour than maybe like a average sweat concentration athlete would
Mm-hmm.
need.
Okay.
So,
So that's really helpful to know. And yeah, I've done tests like that for myself. So I used to train as an endurance athlete. So I started off with running, and then I got into marathons, and then of course I got into triathlons at a certain point, and then I was like, oh, let's start with a sprint triathlon, and then years later, oh, here I am at an Ironman,
yeah.
and so, and then I did two, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's enough beating up my body. So I think I'm
Yeah.
done with that. And then my last race was actually I went out with a bang, and I did Escape from Alcatraz triathlon.
Oh,
So you actually had to get into a lottery for that one. I actually got selected for it, and I'm like, well, I am doing that. So yeah, that was my last one. But anyway, I used to do a sweat rate test for myself on the bike, in like 72, 73 degrees, like, in the apartment and stuff. And then I would be able to estimate how much fluid I would need to replace. But you're right, the sodium replacement is definitely a little bit more tricky. And this is where
yeah.
like working with a professional, would help. So,
Yeah.
but I do not want to leave this conversation without talking about something that I feel like is very, very important. Right. So I also coached a lot of endurance athletes. I've coached a couple ultra marathoners and a lot of other runners and triathletes. And I would like to ask you, in particular, for the longer distance female, either triathletes or runners, right? How important is carbohydrate intake and making sure that they are getting adequate amount of calories every single day, not just for their overall health, but for hormones in particular, and for issues like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome? How important is making sure they get those required amount of calories in, not just from being keto or protein and fat, but from carbohydrates? Why should female athletes, endurance athletes in particular, not be afraid of carbohydrates?
Oh, there's a lot of reasons. So I'll try
Yeah.
not to
Yeah,
skip any.
yeah, you don't need to go into all of them, but maybe
Yeah.
just like a couple of them. So, because this is something that I've seen with
Okay.
my clients that are just deathly afraid of carbohydrates, all right, because of whatever might have happened in the past or whatever, and they feel like, something is going to go wrong if they start eating carbs, or,
Yeah.
they're going to put on body mass or something in areas where they don't want. But it's different when you're an endurance athlete. It's completely different. We're talking about your health at
Yeah.
this point, not just the way you look, like your health. So
Yeah.
maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, carbs are should be an athlete's best friend. I don't care if you're female or male or high school or college or a master's athlete. It doesn't matter. Your body's going to function better and perform better if you're not underdoing it with the carbs. It's endurance athletes. I mean, not only are there competitions 3, 4 to 10 hours depending on the event, but even the training tends to be 90 to 2 hours to 3 hours, so it's a lot of training. So this is the one thing that has never failed me yet. In 10 years, I have never seen an endurance athlete do better on a low carb diet. Every single
Yeah.
one, as we bring their carbs up, and I do it slowly, one for tolerance, like GI tolerance,
Mhm.
but two, so they don't freak out and, we can kind of ease them into it. But I have never once had anybody not perform and feel better when we get their carbs up.
Yeah.
The science is there. There's
Yeah,
all
I've
kinds of
seen a lot of
science.
research too comparing higher carb diets to keto or lower
Yeah.
carb diets. But one thing that always seems to remain consistent is you will perform better as an athlete if you have adequate
Yes.
carbohydrate
And you
intake.
will feel better
Yeah,
and you're going to recover better, like
yeah,
it just physiologically doesn't make sense to be on a low carb diet as an endurance athlete, or really any high level athlete, but especially endurance athletes. There's also science behind this, but I've seen it over and over where people tend to get sick more when they're on a low carb diet and doing that high volume of training.
Hmm.
Thyroid function sometimes declines. So when you talk about weight gain, and fatigue and nutrient deficiencies. I have Hashimoto's, so I have personal experience with all this too. If you're under eating carbs and under eating calories, and now your thyroid hormone is being suppressed, you're going to feel like absolute crap, and you're not going to perform well. You might not even compete, because it can get to the point where
Yeah.
you're crashing. Your body is
Right.
like breaking down. So eating enough carbs and enough calories can help prevent that from happening. Your muscles can cramp sometimes. It's not always an electrolyte or a hydration issue. Sometimes it's actually a carb issue. Your muscles are fatiguing because they don't have the fuel that they need to keep up with what you're wanting it to do, at least for not that
Right.
duration of time.
And yeah, one thing I want to add to that is, if you're an athlete, your body never solely just relies on fat.
No.
No, never, never. It's always an interplay between carbohydrates and fat, and even a tiny, tiny little bit of protein as well. It's just your exercise intensity dictates how much your rate of carbohydrate utilization or your fat utilization. It's never just one or the other, and that's why I try to really hammer, it in with people. So,
Yeah.
and,
Even walking, you're like half carbs, half
yeah.
fat. So
Yeah.
yeah. And then as it
Yeah.
increases,
Yeah. No, it's easy to think that, it's just one or the other, because you have the aerobic training zones. It's like 50 to 60%.
yep.
That's your fat burning zone. And
Oh, that's a whole nother.
yeah,
I
let's
get
not
that a
even
lot
get
too.
there. Yeah.
But I'm
But
burning carbs. I need to burn fat, and I'm like,
yeah.
well, no, actually, you're burning more calories in that carb zone than you
Yeah.
are in the fat zone, which will help you burn more body fat. But
Yeah.
that's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Let's not even get there.
But yeah, so the carbs, and then also with muscle. So if you're not eating enough calories, and even if you're not eating enough carbs, instead of building muscle tissue, you're actually probably going to be breaking down muscle tissue. So you're in like a net.
Bet you will. Yeah.
Yeah, negative.
Yep. Yep.
And so earlier we talked about weight maintenance too. Well, that's a problem, because people will undereat and overdo the cardio, and then they're like, "Why can't I can't lose fat?" I'm like, "Well, instead of building muscle, you're breaking down muscle, and that in itself is also negatively affecting your metabolic rate."
Yep.
So it's the same for athletes, like the endurance athletes, that those same principles do apply. They just need even more than like your everyday athlete would need, or your everyday person, active individual. So
Yeah.
then if we look at health, now we're talking about like your bones suffering. You could end up with osteoporosis. When I've even seen it, unfortunately, in a 20-year-old, where that was that was an eating disorder as well, but they were a runner, and noticed when they started running, they got really lean.
Yep.
And then it, took it too far and had osteoporosis at 20, early 20s.
Wow.
Now,
That's crazy.
luckily, because when it happens to someone that young, if they start eating and they recover, they can actually build back their bone, because they're still at that age where bone building can exceed bone breakdown. But if you're talking about a 40-year-old,
it's a little bit harder at that point. Yeah.
50-year-old, it's not going to happen. It's just your body is not going to be able to heal that. You can prevent it maybe from getting worse, but you're not going to be able to
resistance training can also, help maintain bone
Yeah.
as well, because it is stress on the bone tissue.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's a really good point there, like osteoporosis and bone health too. So and that's one thing I just want to keep hammering on, nutrition, proper exercise. All this stuff is more than just about how you look.
Oh, yeah.
It's about how you feel, how you are performing every day too, and your overall health. So, so let's want to wrap up here in a little bit. So let's kind of transition to your business a little bit. So primarily, who are the types of clients you work with? Who do you serve? How do you serve them? And then I believe you have a course coming up, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I still work with quite a range of people. So I have some higher level athletes, college, high school athletes, so a wide range of athletes. But I also have some people with some complex, I've been doing a lot more like autoimmune disease. So I've got
Okay,
quite a
that's great.
few
Mm-hmm.
patients with autoimmune disease
Mm.
or like prediabetes, maybe some lipid abnormalities.
Okay.
I kind of like the complex stuff too. It
Yeah,
gives me
it's
a nice little
problem
mix.
solving. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
GI is another one. I'm not out there claiming I know everything about GI, but I've done a lot more GI health work in the last couple of years.
So GI is gastrointestinal,
Oh yeah,
right?
sorry.
Yeah, just for the listeners. So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yep.
and that can range. Sometimes it's super complex, and I would probably hand it off to someone who is more clinical GI. But then there's a lot of stuff that it takes detective work, and you can
Mm-hmm.
figure out what's
Yeah.
causing the symptoms.
Yeah.
I like that.
Mm.
So
Awesome.
I do kind of a mix of those things, and at the moment, it's primarily private nutrition coaching, so like one-on-one
Mm-hmm.
nutrition coaching programs. But I do also do some stuff for teams, or I can put together group programs, whether it's corporate wellness or just a
That's great.
personal group of
Mm-hmm.
people. Like we can put together a group coaching program as
Yeah.
well. And I have some meal planning services. So if maybe someone doesn't necessarily need nutrition coaching, but they just want someone to help them out with maybe it's expanding their meals because they're bored of the same
Mm.
things, or optimizing their meals, or maybe they have to medically avoid certain foods or food components, and it makes it challenging for them.
Mm.
The meal planning services can help with stuff like that.
Okay.
And then soon, very soon, as soon as I can get things edited and
Uh-huh.
figured out, the courses will roll out. So long term, I'm hoping to have the Talent Nutrition Performance Nutrition Academy. So it will have a wide range of different online courses people can take. But the first two coming out, the one is called Off Season Gains. So it focuses
Mm.
on gaining muscle and strength in the off season. Now, anyone looking to build muscle and strength honestly could take this course. You don't have to be an athlete or in the off season,
Mm-hmm.
but this is really important for athletes in the off season. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm kind of focusing on that component.
Got it.
But it really, anybody
It could help
looking
anybody
to
put
build
on some
muscle,
muscle. Uh-huh.
yeah, in an
Okay.
effective and realistic way,
Yeah, yeah.
could
And for
do it.
both men and women, right?
Uh-huh.
So
So
muscle is important for women as well.
it
So,
is, and
mhm.
I cover in my course. I actually hit on if there are any differences. Maybe whether it's a recommendation or an equation. I discuss for the males, for the females, and also for 13 to 19-year-olds, because
Great.
some of those recommendations can vary a little bit with the teens.
Yeah.
So I do touch on all three of those groups so that hey, I might need to do this, whereas this person might need to do this. So, and then the other course is just my nutrition essentials for athletes. So some of the things we talked about, I hit on a lot in that course. And again, you don't really have to be an athlete to benefit from the course. This is like, hey, this is the healthy nutrition foundation that pretty much any individual needs if they have goals of maintaining a healthy body composition, maintaining optimal health throughout life, and optimal performance, whether that is just in your weekly gym classes or your elite level athlete. So
Yeah.
that foundation and those principles really don't change no matter who you are.
Right.
And then, in further courses, we talk more about performance nutrition. So how we have our healthy foundation, but for athletes, how do certain things differ? And then we go more into like, okay, if you're this type of athlete, well, this would be the recommendation for you versus this type of athlete, as far as carbs and sodium and all that goes.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Sounds like a very good step-by-step approach, applicable to a lot of different people. So.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
does come with a work. So it has the course. I'm
Okay.
giving you all the info you need, but at the end of the day, the knowledge doesn't matter if you don't implement it. So it comes with a workbook, and it takes you step by step of
Wow.
here's where I would start and go. Now, of course, there could be some people where like, oh, we really need to focus on this, even though that might be step 9 for most people. maybe it's more urgent for you for whatever reason. But generally speaking, it goes in order of like 10 steps that you should follow to really optimize your nutrition.
Okay.
And then the hope is you do that, and then once you get step 1 is going really well, you do that same process, you go to step 2. And then by the time you get to step 10, you should be functioning pretty well. And of course, personalization is always going to be important. So some people might still need a few sessions to really like target their schedule or their preferences, or just to make sure that, hey, am I on the right track? But you'll need a lot less personalized help when you have this foundation than you do if you're just coming in without any knowledge whatsoever.
Yeah, definitely. And is there an ideal age range for this course?
I would say
or these courses, sorry.
A mature teen could definitely benefit from this, but the way the course is, it's for like younger kids. I don't think it would keep their attention. They need to be taught in a little bit of a different way. So a high school athlete would be okay for this, and then honestly all the way through like 60s, 70s,
seniors would benefit too.
Oh yeah, okay. The seniors could definitely benefit from it. And in the nutrition essentials, that's like your foundation. So I do mention age or gender a little bit in there if it needed, but those principles really take you throughout life. So it's not like this will work in your 20s, but not your 70s. That's not true. Okay. In the muscle building one, the off-season gains, though, I do mention actually the masters athletes as well. So when it comes to building muscle, there can be a little bit of differences as far as like optimal protein intake and types of protein. Yep. So I do mention that for our older athletes as well.
Okay. Sounds awesome. And that's going to be really great. So I am going to link in the show notes Rickelle's website, and then social media as well. And is there a newsletter that you have that people can follow as well to know when this is going to be released, or just for general information?
Yeah, I was going to say I can also give you the link to sign up for my emails. So I'm not as consistent as I should be, which for some people that's great because I'm not bombarding their inbox. So I think
spamming their inbox left and right.
If you sign up for my email list, you do not have to worry about me bombarding you because I'm not consistent enough. Yep. And honestly, my goal is to never be that person that is emailing people daily just because I don't like it personally. So, but it is like I do have hopes of getting to like either a weekly or a monthly news, like something so people do get value.
You want to give them the minimal effective dose, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I want you to enjoy it, not be like, oh my God, she's in my inbox again. So I do have, that is in the works, but it also will tell you, then you can know like when it is officially ready to be released. And I am going to do a special, like a promo for my first round of I guess you could say members, clients. So like stuff like that would be good because then when you get emailed, you might not check the website or you might not see it on social media. You'll still know and be able to take advantage of it if you want to. Okay.
And sorry, did you mention the release date or expected release date?
The goal is the end of the month. It is all recorded. It just has to be edited and put up into the platform that hosts it. So the goal is the end of the month. So should be there. Awesome. Or end of May, I guess. When people are watching this.
End of May.
Vary.
Yep. Oh, it'll be up in a couple days. So yeah. So, and one final thing, what social media, where can people find you? Where you're posting the most frequently, I guess. Where can people follow you?
So my most frequent is Instagram, and it's at Tallent Nutrition, which Tallent is with 2 L's, because that's my last name. And my website's the same, tallentnutrition.com, and my LinkedIn is, I don't know if it's Rickelle Tallent or Tallent Nutrition, but anywhere you find me, it's going to either be Tallent Nutrition or Rickelle Tallent. I keep it simple. I don't have any fancy handles or anything.
Why do you need to make it complicated? We don't. So exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been awesome. An hour and 43 minutes. We've
Oh,
set a
wow.
record for me. So, but a lot of really, really good, insightful information that I hope a lot of people will get a lot of value of. Value from. I know they will. And for the listeners, share this with your friends and family, whoever anybody can benefit from it. So, Rickelle, thank you for coming by today, and I'll keep in touch. And excited for these new courses you got coming out, and all the best.
Thank you.
All
Thanks for
right,
having me.
you're welcome. All right.